I'm Megan Carter, 36 years old, a single mom from Denver. And the moment I knew my life had been shattered was not when I saw the front door unlocked. It was when I opened my banking app at O'Hare Airport and watched 3 balances drop me into a silence so deep I could hear my own pulse. The emergency fund I had spent years building was gone. My daughter's college account was gone. The money I had set aside to finally replace my dying car was gone too. $58,000, erased in what looked like a handful of transfers. At first, I thought it had to be fraud, some glitch, some mistake the bank would fix with one phone call. Then I got home. The guest room was empty. The kitchen drawer was half open. And on the counter, where family had shared meals in my house just days before, there was a note with 6 words that made my knees nearly give out. Sorry, sis. I had no choice. My brother had emptied my accounts and vanished with his girlfriend. I wish I could say I screamed, or threw something, or chased after answers right then. I didn't. I just stood there frozen, trying to understand how the person I had defended my whole life could look straight at everything I built for my child and decide it was his to take. I was heartbroken in a way that didn't feel dramatic. It felt cold, quiet, final. And then my 9-year-old daughter looked up at me with a calm expression that did not belong on a child's face and said, "Mom, don't worry. I handled it." I remember staring at her, thinking I had to be misunderstanding what she meant. I wasn't. And what happened after that was stranger, darker, and far more satisfying than anything I could have imagined that day. Before I tell you what my daughter showed me and why my phone rang days later in the middle of the night with my brother screaming on the other end, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always wonder how far stories like this travel before they find the people who were meant to hear them. My brother Ethan is 31 now, and if you had met him on a good day, you probably would have called him charming. He had that easy smile, that relaxed way of talking, the kind of voice that made people think he was harmless. For most of my life, I thought so too. After our parents split, I became the person who cleaned up the messes no one else wanted to see. I was 16 and suddenly learning how to be the stable one while everyone around me fell apart. Ethan was still a kid then, angry at our father, disappointed in our mother, and old enough to remember the shouting but too young to understand what any of it meant. I missed out on a lot trying to keep him steady. I worked after school, took community college classes later than I planned, and spent years telling myself it was temporary. That family was supposed to pull each other through. Even when I got older, got married, got divorced, and found myself rebuilding my life with a little girl depending on me. That habit never left. If Ethan needed help, I helped. If he was short on rent, I spotted him. If his car broke down, I covered the repair. If he swore he was finally getting serious, I chose to believe him. Maybe that was my first real mistake. Not trusting him once. Trusting him over and over after he had done nothing to earn it. By the time this story began, I had finally built something solid. I was working as a senior event operations coordinator for a conference company in Denver. It was not glamorous, but it was stable. And after years of scraping by, stable felt luxurious. I had a townhome in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, a reliable babysitter 2 streets over, and just enough breathing room in my budget to think about the future without panicking. My daughter Sophie was 9, observant in that unsettling way only certain children are, the kind of child who could look at a room for 5 seconds and tell you who was pretending and who was actually upset. She had my eyes and a mind that missed very little. Ethan started coming around more once he realized I was doing well. At first, I thought it was sweet. He would stop by after work, sit at my kitchen island, steal fries off Sophie's plate, and make her laugh with ridiculous voices. Then he started bringing his girlfriend, Vanessa. She was 29, pretty in a polished kind of way, with perfect nails, expensive perfume, and the sort of smile that always looked half a second late. She was warm with me, almost too warm, and she treated my home like a place she was studying while pretending to admire it. She complimented the cabinets, the couch, the framed school photos, then asked the kinds of questions most people know better than to ask. What was my mortgage rate like? Was Denver still a good market for resale? Did my company offer bonuses? Was I still driving the same SUV? Had I started Sophie's college fund yet? The first few times, I answered lightly because that is what women are trained to do when someone crosses a line with a smile. You laugh it off. You soften it. You tell yourself you are being overly sensitive. Sophie noticed before I did. One Saturday night, after Ethan and Vanessa left, Sophie stood on a chair by the sink drying dishes and said, "Mom, why does Vanessa always look at our stuff like she is counting it?" I actually laughed. Counting it. That was exactly how it felt, but I still defended them. I said grown-ups were curious, that people ask weird questions sometimes, that Ethan was family and family does not walk into your house planning to hurt you. Sophie did not argue. She just gave me that small, careful look she gets when she thinks I am wrong, but does not feel like fighting about it. Looking back, I hate that I remember that expression so clearly. It means some part of me already knew she was seeing something real. Around that same time, Ethan's life started looking more unstable than usual. He changed jobs twice in 6 months. He always had an explanation. Bad management, a toxic boss, a company that did not value him. Vanessa had her own chaos. She picked up bartender shifts at a trendy place downtown, posted glamorous photos online, and talked constantly about how she was one lucky break away from something bigger. She and Ethan argued in whispers they thought no one heard. Once I caught him standing on my back patio at night, phone pressed to his ear saying, "Just give me another week, man." I told him it was being handled. When he saw me in the sliding door, he smiled too fast and said it was nothing. I wanted to ask more. I did not. I was tired, and he was my brother, and that old pattern slid right back into place. When people you love show you pieces of the truth, sometimes you help them hide the rest, because it is easier than dealing with what it might mean. Then came my work trip to Chicago. It was a 3-day industry expo, the kind of event where my boss needed me there in person because I handled vendor coordination and logistics better than anyone on the team. I almost said no because I hated leaving Sophie, but Ethan volunteered before I even asked. He said he and Vanessa would stay at my place, help with school drop-off, make sure everything was easy. Vanessa smiled and said, "We've got you, Megan. Go impress people." For one quick second, I remember feeling grateful. That is the part that still stings. Not just that he stole from me, that I thanked him first. The morning I left for Chicago, I ran through the usual checklist 3 times because that is who I am. Lunch money in Sophie's backpack, emergency contacts on the fridge, school pickup plan texted to my neighbor in case traffic got bad. I left Ethan the spare house key, the garage code, and the Wi-Fi password. Nothing else. No banking password, no note with sensitive information, no dramatic act of blind trust that would make the betrayal easy to explain away later. That is important, because what happened next did not come from one stupid move. It came from 100 tiny places where I had let family become more familiar with my life than they had any right to be. Ethan had borrowed my laptop before. He had sat at my kitchen island while I logged into work accounts and bill pay. He knew my routines. Vanessa watched everything. She noticed when I put my phone down. She noticed what browser I used. She noticed that my email often stayed open on my laptop because I was constantly moving between work and home. At the time, it never crossed my mind that attention itself could be a weapon. Chicago was busy enough to keep me distracted most of the first 2 days. The expo floor was loud, my schedule was packed, and my phone buzzed every hour with messages from vendors, clients, and my boss. I checked in with Sophie each night. She sounded fine, excited even. She said Uncle Ethan made pancakes for dinner one night because he messed up regular dinner. She said Vanessa kept asking if she wanted to be in cute videos for social media, and she kept saying no. That made me smile then. Sophie has always had more boundaries than most adults. On the third day, I got to O'Hare early because my last session ended ahead of schedule. I bought a coffee, found a gate seat near the window, and opened my bank app out of habit. I wish I could say there was a warning first, a delay, a suspicious charge, a feeling. There was nothing. 1 second I was tired and thinking about laundry, and the next I was staring at 3 balances that all read 0. My emergency fund was empty. Sophie's 529 college account was empty. The savings account where I had been setting aside money to replace my dying SUV was empty too. $58,000 gone. I remember blinking hard, then logging out, then back in again as if I had typed something wrong. Same numbers, same emptiness. There were recent transfers I did not recognize, fast and clean and deliberate, broken into amounts just small enough to look calculated. My entire body went cold. I called the bank first, then Ethan, then the bank again while I was still hearing Ethan's voicemail. By the time a fraud representative came on the line, I already knew this was not a random hack. The transfers had come from a recognized device linked to my account activity. Someone had accessed not just the money, but the full structure of my financial life. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The representative froze the accounts and told me to file a police report the moment I got home. She said the word compromise 3 times. I hated that word instantly. It sounded clinical. Neat. My life did not feel compromised. It felt gutted. I spent the entire flight home staring at the seat in front of me and replaying every recent conversation in my head. Vanessa asking if I used a big national bank or a local credit union. Ethan casually joking that I probably had my whole life color-coded in spreadsheets. Sophie asking why Vanessa looked at our things like she was counting them. By the time we landed, I was no longer asking if my brother had done this. I was asking how long he had been planning it. I drove straight home from the airport. The house looked normal from the outside. Porch light on, Sophie's bike by the garage, flower pots still lined up by the steps. It was the normalcy that made the inside feel worse. The guest room drawers were empty. The closet was empty. The bathroom counter where Vanessa had spread her skincare products was wiped clean. A mug was still in the sink. One of Sophie's colored pencils was on the floor beneath the kitchen table. In the middle of all that ordinary mess was a folded note on the counter. Sorry, sis. I had no choice. I read it twice because I could not believe someone who had just stolen nearly every dollar I had worked for thought 6 words and cheap guilt could do the job. I called Ethan again, straight to voicemail. I called Vanessa. Phone off. Then I heard Sophie's backpack drop near the front door because my neighbor had just brought her home. She took one look at my face and stopped smiling. Mom, what happened? There is no graceful way to tell a child that someone she loves has robbed her future. I tried anyway. I sat her down in the living room and kept my voice steady longer than I thought I could. I said Uncle Ethan and Vanessa took money from us and left. I said it was a very serious thing and the police were going to help. I said none of it was her fault. Sophie listened without interrupting, her face getting quieter and quieter. Then, while I was still trying not to fall apart in front of her, she said, Mom, don't worry. I handled it. At first I thought she meant emotionally. I thought she was trying to comfort me the way kids do when adults look broken and they do not know what else to offer. but she stood up, walked to her room, and came back holding my old iPad like it weighed something important. What she showed me next changed everything. Sophie set the iPad on the coffee table between us with a level of focus I had only ever seen when she was building something complicated out of Legos. Her voice was calm, but I could see from the way she tucked one foot under herself that she was nervous. "Mom, please do not get mad," she said. I did not know what she meant, but my heart was already pounding again. She opened a folder in the cloud storage app I had set up for her years ago, when the iPad was mostly for games and drawing apps. Inside were video files, audio files, and screenshots arranged in a way that made my throat tighten. She had named them things like kitchen fight, patio call, and bad money talk. I remember staring at the screen, then at her, then back at the screen, feeling the room tilt a little. Sophie took a breath and said, "I knew something was wrong, and you kept saying it was fine, so I saved things in case you needed proof." For a second, I could not speak. Then I managed, "What do you mean? Proof?" She tapped the first video. It was recorded from an angle near the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter. The picture shook for a second, then settled. Ethan and Vanessa were in my kitchen 2 nights before I left for Chicago. Vanessa was leaning against the sink, arms crossed, voice low but sharp. Ethan was pacing. "You think your sister got all this by accident?" Vanessa said. "Look at this house. Look at the accounts she talks about. Look at the way she plans everything for her kid. She lives like she is the only person who ever had to struggle." Ethan ran both hands over his face and muttered, "Stop." Vanessa did not stop. She said, "She practically raised you, right? Then she owes you for the years she spent acting like your mother instead of your sister." That line hit me like a slap. I felt Sophie's hand touch my arm for just a second, like she knew the exact second I needed it. Ethan stopped pacing. He said, "You do not get it. If I do not pay this off, they are going to keep coming after me." Vanessa lowered her voice. "Then stop whining and do what needs to be done." He looked sick. Not innocent, not forced. Sick. Like a man standing on the edge of something he knew was wrong and wanted permission to call it necessary. The video ended. Sophie opened an audio file from the next day. This one had been recorded from the hallway. You could hear Vanessa more clearly than Ethan. She said, "Once the money clears, we leave. Miami first. Then somewhere else." Ethan asked, "And if she calls the cops?" Vanessa actually laughed. "On her own brother. Please. She will cry first, rationalize second, and by the time she gets angry, we will be gone." I closed my eyes for a second because hearing someone narrate my worst habits that accurately made me feel exposed in my own home. Sophie was quiet. I knew she was watching me more than the screen now. I forced myself to stay focused. "Show me the rest," I said. The next piece was what made me stop shaking and start getting angry. Sophie had turned on the home camera feature in the old monitoring app I once used to keep an eye on deliveries and check the front room when she got home from school. I had forgotten it even existed. She had not. She had placed the iPad to catch part of the kitchen and the office nook. The timestamp was the afternoon after I left for Chicago. Ethan sat at my laptop. Vanessa stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, giving directions like she had done this before. "Try the email first," she said. He typed, cursed, then said, "It wants the code." Vanessa replied, "Check her messages. She always leaves things open." My stomach turned because I suddenly remembered rushing that morning, leaving my laptop asleep instead of shut down. My email tab opened because I had been sending last-minute vendor confirmations. Ethan opened the inbox, found the verification code, and read it out loud. He moved through my accounts one by one. Emergency savings. Sophie's 529. Vehicle fund. He hesitated only once when Sophie's college account came up on screen. Vanessa saw it too. She said, Do not start growing a conscience now. Ethan whispered, "That one is for her." Vanessa leaned in and said something I will never forget. "So is every dollar your sister ever spent on you. Move it." He did. In that moment, whatever protective part of me still wanted to see him as weak instead of cruel finally cracked. Weak men still choose. Weak men still click transfer. Weak men still steal from children if it saves themselves. Sophie opened another clip, this one just audio. Ethan was outside on the back patio, speaking into his phone. He sounded different there. Harder. More bitter. He said, "I am getting it, all right. Stop calling like I am some idiot. She has more saved than I thought. No, I do not care where the college money came from. Money is money." I covered my mouth. It was not just theft anymore. It was revelation. The truth about him, stripped of excuses and panic and Vanessa's influence, was right there in his own voice. Sophie had one more thing. She pulled out a small spiral notebook with purple stars on the cover. She said sometimes she could not record because they were too close. So she wrote down what they said after they left the room. On one page, in careful block letters, she had written, "Vanessa said if he chickens out, she will tell his sister about the gambling men and the warehouse." Ethan said, No, not that." On another page, she wrote, "Ethan said he is tired of Megan acting like she saved him, and maybe it is time she knows how it feels to lose everything at once." I stared at that line so long Sophie asked if I needed water. Everything at once. That was what he wanted me to feel. Not just loss, humiliation, helplessness. Maybe revenge of his own for every insecurity he never had the courage to say out loud when it might have mattered. I pulled Sophie into my arms so fast she squeaked. I held her there and felt something complicated and aching rise in my chest. Pride, yes. Gratitude, absolutely. But also shame. Because she had tried to warn me. She had noticed the danger. She had protected us the only way a 9-year-old knew how, and I had kept telling her not to worry. "I am so sorry I did not listen to you," I whispered into her hair. She pulled back and looked at me with those serious eyes. "It is okay, Mom. I knew you would need evidence." I let out one broken laugh because of course that was what she thought of first. Evidence. My child, while I was still clinging to the idea of family, had already accepted reality and started building a case. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like someone about to fight back. I copied every file to my own phone, emailed backups to myself, and called the police again. This time, I did not sound confused or emotional. I sounded prepared. When I told the dispatcher I had recordings of the theft being planned and executed, we were asked to come in immediately. Detective Rachel Alvarez met us at the station that evening. She was direct, sharp, and refreshingly unimpressed by family excuses. She watched the videos, took notes, and halfway through Ethan's patio call, she looked up at me and said, "Your brother is in real trouble." For the first time that day, I felt something warm move through the ice in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but direction. Detective Alvarez put in an urgent request to trace recent travel and flag the digital transfer trail with the bank. When we got home, Sophie sat at the kitchen table eating crackers because everything had happened too fast for dinner, and she asked the question I had been avoiding. Are they going to get away with it? I looked at my daughter, at the iPad, at the empty spot on the counter where the note had been, and said, "No, they made one mistake. They thought I would still be the one cleaning up after him." The next 48 hours moved in ugly little bursts. Calls from the bank, calls from Detective Alvarez, calls from my boss, who told me to take all the time I needed and sounded more furious on my behalf than some actual relatives had ever sounded over anything. The bank confirmed what the videos already showed. My accounts had been accessed from my home laptop using my email for verification, The transferred funds had bounced through a newly linked external account that belonged to Ethan. From there, chunks of money were pulled out fast, some in cash, some through debit activity, some routed into travel expenses. Detective Alvarez told me they had enough to move quickly, especially with the recorded planning and the clear digital trail. By the afternoon of the second day, they knew Ethan and Vanessa had flown to Miami. They had used their real names at the airport because criminals are often stupid in the exact places they feel smartest. One hotel booking led to another. A casino charge showed up before the second night. I wish I could say hearing that made me numb. It did not. It made me furious in a way that almost felt clean. Sophie's college account had become chips and cocktails and whatever fantasy those two idiots thought stolen money could buy. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because I was replaying everything Ethan had said in those recordings and hearing layers in them I had missed before. It was not just desperation. There was resentment there. Real resentment. The kind that grows in people who take help until help starts feeling like an accusation. Around 2 a.m, my phone rang. Unknown number. I sat up in bed so fast I nearly knocked the lamp over. For one stupid second I thought it might be the police. Then I answered and heard Ethan screaming, "Megan, what the hell did you do?" His voice was ragged and panicked and loud enough that I held the phone away from my ear. I did not answer right away. I wanted to hear him fill the silence. He did. Vanessa is losing it. The cops came to the hotel. They talked to the front desk. They are tracking everything. Why would you do this to me? I actually laughed. A short, ugly sound that surprised even me. Why would I do this to you? Ethan, you stole $58,000 from me and my daughter. What exactly did you think I was going to do? There was a clatter on his end, like he had knocked something over. Then he shouted, "You do not understand. Vanessa is saying this was all me now. She is saying if she goes down, she is taking me with her." That was the first moment I understood he had not called because he felt guilty. He had called because he was afraid. Not afraid of what he had done to us. Afraid of consequences landing on him. I heard movement in the hallway outside my room and turned. Sophie stood there in dinosaur pajamas, hair messy, eyes half awake. I motioned for her to stay where she was. She did. Ethan kept talking. She said you sent videos. How do you even have videos? I looked straight at my daughter as I answered. You made the mistake of underestimating the smartest person in this family. He went quiet for a second. Then his voice dropped. Sophie. I did not reply. He said my daughter's name again. Softer this time, and I heard something in him crack. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was just fear wearing a different coat. I did not care. Then he said, I never wanted to take her college money. Vanessa made me do that. That line did it. Something hot and absolute settled in me. No, I said. Vanessa may have pushed. She may have planned. She may have counted every dollar in my house before she stole it. But you clicked transfer. You listened to her tell you to empty your niece's future, and you did it. Do not stand there and hand me that weak excuse now. He started crying. Actual crying. Loud and breathless and self-pitying. I had seen Ethan cry before when our father missed birthdays, when breakups hit, when life got hard. This sounded different. This sounded like a man grieving the end of the lie he told himself about being decent. Megan, please. Just call them. Tell them I will bring back what is left. Tell them I was not thinking straight. Tell them this is Vanessa. Tell them I panicked. It was almost pathetic how quickly he started throwing words at the wall, hoping one would sound sympathetic enough to save him. I asked the one question that had been sitting inside me since O'Hare. Did you ever plan to come back? Or was I just your easiest victim? He did not answer. And that silence was answer enough. I could hear Vanessa shouting somewhere behind him now, furious, frantic, saying he needed to stop talking and hang up. Ethan lowered his voice and said, "She has videos of me moving the money. She said if I ever turned on her, she would make sure I took the fall. She told me this was our only shot." Then he added, like it might fix anything, "I was going to pay it back." I almost admired the stupidity of that sentence. With what, Ethan? Your luck, your gambling debt, your talent for losing every chance anyone ever gave you. He inhaled sharply. I had never spoken to him like that before. Maybe I should have years ago. He said, "You always think you are better than me." There it was. Not apology, not regret. The old rot underneath everything. "You know what?" I said quietly. "I think I made myself smaller around you for years so you would never have to feel that. And you still chose to hate me for surviving things you would not even face." On the other end, Vanessa yelled his name again. Then I heard a pounding sound, a muffled male voice, and Ethan went from angry to terrified in half a breath. "Megan, wait. Do not hang up. Please do not hang up. They are here." For 1 second, the old version of me almost answered. The sister, the rescuer, the one who stayed on the line. Instead, I said, "Tell the truth." Then I ended the call. Sophie was still standing in the doorway. I crossed the room and pulled her close. She whispered, "Was he crying?" "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a second, then asked, "Are you going to save him?" I looked toward the dark window, my phone still warm in my hand, and said, "No, sweetheart. This time, I am going to save us." By morning, Detective Alvarez had confirmation. Miami police had detained both Ethan and Vanessa for questioning, then made the arrest official once the transfer records and warrants came through. I expected to feel triumphant. What I actually felt was steadier than that, more useful. Like something in me had finally stopped wobbling. I took Sophie to school, went home, made coffee I did not really want, and spent the next 6 hours answering questions. Yes, that was my laptop in the footage. Yes, that was my home. Yes, that was my brother's voice. Yes, the funds belonged to me and my daughter. No, neither of them had permission. When Detective Alvarez called later that afternoon, her tone told me everything before she finished the first sentence. Vanessa had turned on Ethan instantly. Of course she had. She told police he was unstable, emotional, reckless, and entirely responsible. She admitted to taking the trip, admitted she knew the money was not his, but painted herself as someone who got caught up in a bad situation with a desperate man. It would have been almost impressive if it were not so predictable. The problem for Vanessa was that Sophie's files did not care about her performance. The videos showed her directing him, pressuring him, mocking me, and laying out the plan in her own words. Ethan, on the other hand, tried to split the difference. He admitted the transfers, admitted the gambling debt, admitted that men he owed money to had threatened him, admitted Vanessa pushed him. But he also kept circling back to one detail that told me more about him than anything else. He said he had been tired of being the family disappointment. He said I treated him like a project. He said maybe a part of him wanted to take something back for once. When Detective Alvarez repeated that, I stared at the kitchen wall and thought, there it is. The truth finally did not even surprise me. It did not excuse him. It made him smaller. 2 days later, prosecutors in both states coordinated charges with Colorado taking the lead because that is where the access and theft had occurred. We learned that about $31,000 could be recovered. The rest had already been burned through in cash withdrawals, hotel charges, casino losses, clothes, and flights. $31,000 was more than I expected and far less than enough. There are numbers that hurt in strange ways. 58,000 disappearing hurt. But hearing that $27,000 of sacrifice had become nothing in less than a week hurt differently. That amount had school lunches in it, winter coats, overtime hours, nights I said no to vacations and yes, to one more shift, one more event, one more freelance logistics contract. I was asked whether I wanted to make a statement before formal charging decisions and any possible plea negotiations. I said yes before the attorney finished the question. A week later, I sat in a conference room with the prosecutor, Detective Alvarez, and a speakerphone connection to Miami for cross-state coordination. Ethan appeared on video for part of it. He looked worse than I expected. Pale, hollow, unshaven. He started with my name the same way people start with prayers when they do not know what else to say. Megan. I cut him off. No. You do not get to begin with my name like we are having a family conversation. This is not that. He swallowed hard. The prosecutor asked whether I wanted to hear his version directly. I said yes. Ethan said Vanessa had pushed the plan, but when the window opened, he took it. He said he told himself he would put the money back after one big win. He said he hated himself halfway through it. He said he knew he crossed a line when he moved Sophie's college fund and did it anyway. Then, because he still had not learned, he asked me to consider not ruining the rest of his life. Not ruining the rest of his life. The arrogance of that almost took my breath away. I leaned toward the camera and said, "You ruined the version of my life where I believed my own brother would protect my daughter. You ruined the years it took me to feel financially safe after my divorce. You took from a child, and you want to talk to me about your future." He looked down. Vanessa, through her own attorney, later offered to cooperate more fully in exchange for reduced exposure. The evidence kept her from escaping cleanly, but she still maneuvered hard for the best deal possible. She provided messages, account details, and proof Ethan had made direct contact with some of the men he owed. That helped prosecutors argue that he was not just manipulated. He was an active participant trying to solve one disaster by creating a bigger one for us. In the end, Vanessa got a plea that kept her out of long prison time, but destroyed almost everything else. She received probation, restitution obligations, fraud-related restrictions, community service, and a civil judgment tied to my losses. Her employer dropped her. The online image she had curated collapsed once the arrest report became public. Friends disappeared, sponsors vanished. She did not go to prison for years, but she lost the life she had been performing for the world. Ethan got the heavier outcome. Prior minor gambling-related offenses combined with the scale of the theft, the recorded planning, and the transfer trail left him facing real prison time. His attorney pushed for sympathy. The prosecutor pushed for accountability. I was asked, quietly and more than once, whether I wanted to soften my victim's statement because he was my brother. That may have been the most insulting question anyone asked me through the entire process. When sentencing came months later, I stood in court and said the truth. I said I had spent most of my life protecting Ethan from consequences that should have taught him how to be a man. I said every time I cleaned up one of his messes, I helped him believe someone else would always absorb the cost of his choices. I said my daughter had more integrity at 9 than he had shown at 31. Then I looked at him and delivered the one line I had been carrying for months. I raised you like family. You treated me like an ATM. The room went still after that. Ethan was sentenced to 4 years in prison with restitution. Not enough to erase what he did. Enough to make sure he finally sat still with it. Vanessa left that courthouse free in the technical sense, but exposed, indebted, and permanently stained by what everyone now knew she was. I drove home from court with my hands steady on the wheel. When I parked, Sophie met me at the front door before I even had my bag off my shoulder. She asked, "Is it over?" I knelt down in the entryway and said, "The case is over. The rebuilding starts now." Rebuilding was not graceful. I wish people talked about that more. They talk about survival like it comes with music and a montage and a strong closing line. Real rebuilding looks like spreadsheets at midnight and learning to breathe through anger when a password reset email hits your inbox. It looks like checking your accounts too often, changing locks, turning on two-factor authentication for everything, and realizing that financial security is not just about earning money. It is about protecting access to your life. The first 6 months after sentencing were hard. Even with 31,000 recovered, the damage was real. Sophie's college fund took the worst hit. My emergency savings was a shadow of what it had been. I picked up extra projects through work and took weekend logistics consulting jobs for smaller local events. I was tired, but this time, the tiredness felt different. Cleaner. It was not the tiredness of being used. It was the tiredness of building something back, with full knowledge of what I was protecting and from whom. People surprised me too. My boss organized a private fundraiser without making a spectacle of it. Friends I had not seen in months sent grocery gift cards. My neighbor, who had walked Sophie home that terrible day, started dropping off soup with the kind of quiet kindness that asks for no applause. Between support, work, and ruthless budgeting, we stabilized faster than I expected. Not because what happened did not matter. Because I stopped leaking energy into denial. Sophie handled the aftermath in her own steady way. The school counselor told me she was sad, but not shattered. Angry, but not lost in it. She had a clear moral framework. Bad choices have consequences. Love does not cancel damage. Telling the truth matters. Sometimes I think children understand justice more cleanly than adults because they have not yet learned how to romanticize dysfunction. One evening, while I was updating our budget, Sophie sat across from me doing math homework and said, "Mom, are you still mad at him, or are you hurt?" The question was so precise I had to stop typing. "Both," I told her. "But hurt lasts longer." She nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she said something I wrote down later because I never wanted to forget it. She said, "I think being family is supposed to mean you get more chances to do right, not more chances to do wrong." That was the lesson at the center of everything, and it came from a 9-year-old. Ethan wrote to me from prison after about 5 months, then again after 7, then again after 9. At first I did not answer. His first letters were full of shame and self-pity braided so tightly together it was hard to separate one from the other. By the third letter, the tone changed. He stopped blaming Vanessa, stopped blaming debt, stopped blaming our childhood, me, the world, bad luck, or timing. He wrote, "I stole from you. I stole from Sophie. No one forced my hand across that keyboard." That line mattered, not because it repaired anything, but because it was the first honest thing he had said in years. Eventually I wrote back. Not much. Just enough to say I had received the letter and that Sophie was doing well in school. He replied with no request for forgiveness. That mattered too. The civil process squeezed Vanessa harder than the criminal one had. Her income was monitored. Her payment plan was strict. She tried twice to reduce her obligations and failed both times. The public version of herself, the curated, glossy woman who thought my life was something to be looted, disappeared. In a story like this, people usually want the cleanest revenge possible. They want prison bars, instant karma, loud suffering. But what satisfied me most was quieter. It was seeing truth pin both of them down in the exact ways they each feared most. Ethan had to sit with himself long enough that there was nowhere left to run from what he was. Vanessa had to live in the world as someone people finally saw clearly. 3 years later, my emergency fund is healthy again. Sophie's college account is rebuilding. I replaced the SUV with something modest and reliable. Sophie is 12 now, tall for her age, obsessed with coding, and still very pleased with herself for what she calls her detective era. Every now and then she jokes that she saved our family finances before middle school. She is not wrong. Ethan and I speak rarely. When he was released, I agreed to one supervised meeting in a public park. Not for him. For me. And for Sophie, who deserved to see that boundaries can exist without cruelty. He looked older. Smaller somehow. He apologized directly to her before he apologized to me. I respected that. Sophie listened, then thanked him for saying it and made no move to hug him. I respected that even more. Some people hear stories like mine and think the lesson is never trust anyone. That is not the lesson. The lesson is that love without boundaries becomes permission for the wrong people. The lesson is that helping family is not the same as protecting them from the consequences of their choices. The lesson is that financial literacy, digital caution, and emotional clarity are not cold things. They are forms of care. They protect children. They protect futures. They protect peace. And the deepest lesson of all came from my daughter. When something feels wrong, do not let comfort talk you out of your own instincts. Do not dismiss the quiet truth just because it comes from a small voice, or because accepting it would break your heart. Sometimes the person who sees most clearly is the one no one thinks to ask. I used to believe the strongest thing I ever did was survive being betrayed by my own brother. I do not think that anymore. I think the strongest thing I ever did was finally stop calling destruction love just because it shared my last name.